Seamelt is increasing Arctic ambitions of the United States and China and Russia. And the relationships between the three countries are changing in and outside the Arctic realm. And so for Russia, the prospect of expanding access to more than 4,000 miles of Arctic coastline puts Arctic seamelt squarely in the national security and geostrategic and development calculus of Moscow. The Russians have already asserted unilateral control over the Northern Sea route. Um, that is the topic of much international discussion. But they are already deploying military assets at several geographic bottlenecks along the route.
With the melting of the sea ice in the Arctic and the growing strategic importance that it could play, I think that it can have great effects on the relationships between the US, China, and Russia, these great powers in the coming years. Um, as we can tell presently, the relationships between these countries are not the best. The U.S. and Russia's relationship has been greatly deteriorating since the Cold War era in terms of nuclear weapons and other factors, and the relationship with the U.S. and China also isn't great. So I think with that in mind, and the potential for growing tensions in the Arctic, considering that Russia kind of believes the Northern Sea Route, which essentially is the sea route along its northern border in the Arctic, they view that route as a domestic route and something that only Russia can use. Whereas other countries may start to view that route as something that's international that they can also take part in.
The relationship between the superpowers who either border or look at the Arctic, either from a military perspective or an economic perspective, and I think it's the latter one that's going to come to the fore first. Clearly, there are military advantages because if you are looking, perhaps we'll come later to look at the nuclear dimension of this, but if you're looking to fly a missile between the superpowers, then the shortest distance between them, apart from between Russia and China, is largely over the pole. And if you're not doing it over the pole, you're going the long way around, or you've got to forward deploy something somewhere else. So I think there is a military dimension that immediately plays into a more nationalist strategic view of who owns this water.
Russia, we have seen them increase in defense in that area. But for nuclear capabilities to move up there, it could happen, and it's due to its strategic location. So this could assist Russia movement trying to move out of containment. So they feel a lot of containment from the West or Western Europe. And this could be a chance for them to actually move out of that and put themselves in a new strategic location.
Russia's geography and long history in the Atlantic makes it an important player in establishment of new shipping routes. The Northern Sea Route is quite literally in their backyard or their northern yard. We've already seen a great deal of Russian investment in icebreakers and expansion into the maritime domain. And some people don't realize that all of the major rivers in Siberia flow northward into the Arctic Ocean. And that's actually impeded development in Siberia for really hundreds of years. And the prospect of connecting Siberian ports to greater international shipping networks through the Northern Sea Route is an important driver for Russia's development. At the same time, permafrost melting in northern Russia is also beginning to wreak havoc on infrastructure, which could actually prove to be pretty costly for Russia. For China, it has clearly had ambitions in the Arctic, both for economic reasons and also to amplify its image as a legitimate world power. They invest heavily in projects in essentially every Arctic country, presumably for their own interests and as leverage to press these interests in the region. And a few years ago, China introduced the Polar Silk Road, a piece of its larger Belt and Road Initiative global infrastructure project, as a framework to jointly develop Arctic routes with other parties. And the United States has long sought a more national presence in the Arctic to protect its interests and secure free passage of vessels through the Northwest Passage and the Northern Sea Route. And a number of disputes over navigational routes associated with Arctic transit will likely emerge. There's also the issue of the enhanced cooperation in recent years between Russia and China over Arctic matters, and this adds an added dimension to regional geopolitical concerns, especially for the United States. It remains to be seen how deep this cooperation really goes, but the prospects of a deepening Russia-China economic tie seems pretty likely. And so, and how the U.S.-China relationship evolves and whether both countries can work to avoid a costly and largely elective Cold War is a big question mark.
And in particular, when you look at the Bering Strait, which is the access to the Arctic from the Northern Pacific, which would be the primary route that a Chinese merchant ship would, leaving Shanghai or other ports, would turn left and go up through the Bering Strait. That is a strait that would be covered by UNCLOS between Alaska and Russia. But the first indications are that Russia's going to look to, firstly, convoy ships through the thinning sea ice as a first way of doing it, because they probably are going to need some measure of ice breaking, or at least a contingent capability for that. And on the back of that convoying, I think they're going to build a pretty strong international law case for these to be perceived as a Russian Silk Road, a Russian highway on the sea. And I think that is going to be anathema to the US and probably anathema to other countries. So I think there's a big strategic argument to be fought about who controls, who tariffs, who manages, who allows the passage of these ships.